Hello and welcome to our discussion of Divorce with Respect, a team approach to support you and your family. My name is Mark Soboslai. I'm a collaborative family lawyer and mediator in Westport, Connecticut. With me today are Jill Bix and Brendan Holt, who are also collaborative family lawyers, Michelle Adelman, a collaborative mental health professional, and Traci Provost, a collaborative financial professional. Today's presentation is part of a statewide initiative sponsored by the Connecticut Council for Non-Adversarial Divorce as part of something that we refer to as Divorce with Respect Week. For more information, the website for the Connecticut Council for Non-Adversarial Divorce is www.gooddivorcect.com. We've also put the email addresses for each of our presenters below in their Zoom box. So each of our panelists today will talk about the interdisciplinary collaborative family law process. And we'll begin with attorney Jill Bix. Jill, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Happy to, Mark. Thank you so much, and very excited to be with you all today. So my name is Jill Bix. I have been a lawyer for more than 30 years. I started out practicing corporate litigation at a big firm, and I've practiced in many, many ways. Now I'm a solo practitioner. So I started focusing my practice on family law back in 1995. And since then, I've really come to embrace the non-adversarial approach as really the best way for families to go through what I consider to be a transition to a new family relationship.
So Jill, in the law, divorce is more formally known as dissolution of marriage. What are the main topics or categories of issues that spouses normally must consider when approaching a divorce or dissolution of marriage?
Yeah, so to demystify what has to happen in a divorce, it's actually pretty limited in scope. What happens is only a court can grant you a divorce or a legal separation. A court has to divide your property, meaning your assets like your house, your bank account, your retirement account, your liabilities if you have credit card debt or a mortgage, and that's called property distribution. They also have to decide, a court has to decide whether there's support flowing from one of the partners to the other. In some states, that's called alimony. In some states, it's called spousal support. And in other states, it's called maintenance. The other thing that has to be decided, if you have children under the age of emancipation or majority, whether there's child support, and most states have child support guidelines. Other things that have to be decided if you have children is how to share costs for them, like work-related childcare, educational expenses, health expenses, and college. And then also, only if you have young children under the age of majority, which is different for different states, you have to decide, how do you make decisions about them? That's called legal custody. And how do you make a schedule for them, which is called residential custody. And a court approves it, but people can make whatever agreement they want.
Thank you. And Jill, you mentioned you've been doing a practice for quite some time, not just of collaborative, but also of litigation and family law in general. What are some of the recurring questions or concerns that clients often have? And how do you approach those as a collaborative practitioner?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. Most everybody who I talk to for the very first time has two things top of mind. The first question is, what am I entitled to? And the second question is, what is fair? I only want what I'm entitled to, and I only want what's fair. And those questions are impossible to address from a litigation perspective because the law governing those questions is vague. And two people Sally and Tom Jones can have the same facts and circumstances as Mary and Dave Smith, be before different judges and have a completely different outcome. So when people ask me what I'm entitled to, I say you're entitled to a property distribution, possibly spousal support of some amount, and these other things that I just outlined in the very most general way. The question about what's fair is another challenging one, because Mark, what's fair to you might be very different from what is fair to me. So if you get stuck in your head that, I only want what's fair, you're setting yourself up for additional conflict because you're not recognizing that reasonable people can disagree about what's fair. Other questions that I get, well, how much child support will I have to pay? How much support can I expect if I've not been working? I've been married for a certain number of years. Are there any rules of thumb? Well, in Connecticut, the answer is yes, there are rules relating to child support, but in the context of property distribution or spousal support, the answer is there are factors, and it's very vague. So what I like about the collaborative process is we take every family as they come to us, and we ask them, what are your goals and your interests? And we'll talk more about that later in the program, but the question is answered very differently if you're coming at it from a litigation perspective, which is the more I make, the more I get, and the less the other person gets, then I win, right? That sets you up for conflict and great expense. The better questions are, what is important to me? What is important to my spouse? What is important to our family? That's how I approach it as a collaborative attorney.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that distinction, Jill, between the sort of the adversarial approach and the non-adversarial approach. As we mentioned at the outset, this entire discussion today is sponsored by the Connecticut Council for Non-Adversarial Divorce, and there are different processes that clients can engage in. Sometimes they're not told about them, and part of our objective today is to tell them about them. Our next presenter, attorney Brendan Holt, we'll talk a bit about those processes. And Brendan, before we do that, can you first tell us a bit about your background and your practice?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. My career started out actually as a family relations counselor for just about 7 years, working as a neutral and an evaluator in family court in Connecticut. Since then, I've transitioned into private practice, and my current firm is exclusively collaborative divorce and mediation with some co-parenting mediation as well. So that's what I do now. I'm also an adjunct professor teaching collaborative divorce at the Quinnipiac University School of Law and running their pro bono mediation clinic. So, you're asking about the other processes or the processes that exist for divorce. I'll start, I think, with the two non-adversarial parts and approach the conversation from the continuum of potentially most streamlined to kind of the most prescriptive and regimented. So starting there, I'll just mention mediation, which is the idea of a neutral facilitator. Sometimes you can co-mediate with another mediator and have different professions, mental health professional, financials, and a lawyer working together as co-mediators. But it is very often a single facilitator who helps the folks go through some of the issues and facilitates conversation, tries to help them reach a consensus as to what they find to be, for their situation, most equitable. It's important to note, I think, that although some mediators absolutely are lawyers, they're not the lawyer for either party or representing either side. So what they're doing, they're giving some information, they're putting structure to a process, but not strategic legal advice to either side. So that's important to understand when you're assessing what your needs might be with these conversations and approaching this dissolution in these conversations. Basically, that kind of starts the transition into what else might be appropriate, because having the mediator in that neutral role and not representing either party sometimes is most effective when there's reasonable communication, reasonable amounts of trust and openness between the parties, and some perspective that they are on the same page about at least basic issues, if not more. As you kind of drift away from that comfort level, then the kind of second process becomes something for serious consideration, and that's what collaborative divorce is. And to distinguish that's this team approach where we have the mental health professional as a neutral coach and a financial planner, and each party has their own attorney in that process who is committed to representing them, but also both attorneys and the team more broadly is committed to not going to court and not pursuing it in that way that traditionally has other court annexed processes and again prescriptive pieces that take some time and have different effects. So that they work together as a team in that way to help folks kind of focus on their needs and interests. And I think the important piece that just highlight in that collaborative environment is just how much it enables people to kind of focus more effectively and empathetically on how to actually look forward and be divorced, not simply get divorced. It's not a thing that ends necessarily when a dissolution is signed and made official by a judge. That kind of proactive and looking forward cooperative experience can manifest itself in co-parenting for sure, where you can really build a plan and work together on its formulation and understand there's a relationship that's going to be for a long, long time important to you and your children. It also manifests itself in kind of a more holistic and in-depth financial planning, rather than just kind of being very tense about some information. Radical transparency and discussions and option generation in a more open environment lets you kind of generate options that otherwise might be scary or just not come up when you're not focused on the possibilities. So that idea is to really look for kind of the ability to have true creativity and actually tailored solutions and a deeper understanding about that family's autonomy. And that's what collaborative can really help provide a space for. That's going to be too contrasted with the traditional approach where there is litigation or representation through the formal court process, where it tends to be focused more on, a winning and a losing mentality or positional mentality. And even with the best of intentions can very often get people stuck in just their position and as a result, missing potential overlap. So the litigation model, can substitute any type of aggressive sports metaphors here, but you're just, focused on your goal primarily, and trying to communicate that through even very well-intentioned attorneys leaves things out sometimes of the communication. So it's a decrease in control and sometimes a decrease in the depth of the conversation that you can have about parenting plans or financial matters. And so that sometimes can cause it to be a little bit longer of a process and again, less direct, which goes to both efficiency and again, maybe the quality of the outcome. So there are situations where that is appropriate, where in certain situations, people really do need to be protected and represented, but that's something to be able to ask your lawyer about, or the mental health coach when you're discussing these three things. At what point do these issues, could they be benefited by this increased structure? And that really starts with folks going to professionals and being able to ask these questions. Well, what is the difference? Or what about this example? Or what about this fear I have? Where might I fit along this continuum based on these things? And then being able to pick an approach that seems to fit that particular person based on their needs for increased protection or increased transparency with a team around them.
So thank you. It's sometimes confusing for clients to distinguish between the various process options, and I think it's helpful, Brendan, for you to have clarified those. Turning back to the collaborative process, you mentioned that we work in a team, an interdisciplinary team. We have Michelle and Traci here, who are not lawyers. Michelle is from the mental health background, and Traci is a financial professional. It's really important for the team to include the people from other perspectives, as any collaborative lawyer will tell you. So what we'd like to do is turn first to Michelle and ask her as a member of a collaborative team how she works with everyone on the team. But first, Michelle, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your practice.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I've been working for over 30 years with individuals, with couples, with families. I am a licensed therapist and I love what I do. I have always been drawn particularly to couples and families. I find that when you're working with a system, you're incredibly effective at working with what you have right in front of you, and you can make some really significant changes with people right in the moment. So systems, here we've got systems with what we're working on. I have also in the past 10 or 11 years been half of Changing Families, which has given me an opportunity to teach the Connecticut mandated parenting education program. So I've worked with thousands of people, co-parents who are going through this process of restructuring their families and assisted them in getting education about how best to move through this process. And always it's the kids who are kind of the North Star there. That's who we stay focused on. And I have my own practice. I've been able to take all of the experiences that I've had in the past years and the many settings I've worked in the variety of populations that I've worked with. And now I get to be a part of people's lives as they're going through their own struggles. I feel really, really honored to be able to be a part of that.
So Michelle, it's so important to have you here because oftentimes people think of the legal process and lawyers as dominating the legal process. Tell us a little bit about the role of the mental health professional in the collaborative process and what it is that you do as part of the team.
Sure. So first, the mental health professional is trained, of course, in the collaborative family law model. And we act as a divorce and a communication coach during the collaborative process for the co-parents. Our role in this forum is very different than a traditional mental health therapist. This isn't therapy. What we are doing is we're providing a neutral space using a therapeutic lens as we assist this process along, making sure that whatever dynamics, whatever is being brought to the table, and it is literally a table where everybody is sitting around the table, whether it's in a remote setting or in person, everybody's there and everybody has a voice, but we're helping that process move along. And so we're not providing individual or couple therapy. We're not acting in an evaluative therapeutic role, but certainly we have the ability to address concerns that come up through that therapeutic lens.
And in your role, how do you help the individual spouses express themselves? And what are some of the things that you encounter when we're in that collaborative space and with people needing to express themselves?
Sure. So I mentioned that everybody has a voice, and what's really wonderful about the collaborative process is that you are sitting there with your attorney, and so you have this advocate, you have this person who is there with you and for you, and you are also there speaking for yourself. And when the dynamics of a relationship and the emotions that are very prevalent become more of a guiding force than not, we as a mental health neutral can assist there. Sometimes we'll meet with the individual and their attorney. Sometimes we'll meet with the individual, the financial neutral and their attorney. And sometimes we'll just meet individually with them to help them over a bump in the road. Sometimes I will meet, and we'll almost always meet with the couple to understand better what they are bringing with them historically. And so having that insight when things do come up, we're in a much better position to be able to manage whatever conflict is present. There are other aspects to this, and that include helping and educating the parents about what it's like for their children to go through this, how to communicate with their kids about this process, offering them emotional support. This is one of the toughest things that people will ever do. And we are not educated about how to restructure a family when we decide to get married or when we decide to have a child together. And so whether it's a custody action or whether it's a divorce, there are many things that people just don't understand. And at a most stressful time, people need that education. And the idea of developing a parenting plan is another element of what we will do. I will meet with the couple and talk with them about their values and interests. You've heard Jill and Brendan already talk about values and interests. There are values pertaining to the family and to restructuring the family and how you want to move through that process and how quickly you can move toward healing. There are values and interests that have to do with the children and how effectively are you going to be able to communicate and co-parent to make decisions about your children. People believe that somehow they're not going to have to interact with their co-parent after this, but if you have kids, and really they're always our kids, then you are going to have to somehow, and we will identify what is the best communication process for you, depending upon how much conflict there is for you, how you're going to actually have these conversations. And they're going to have to be done so that your children's lives can move forward. And then there's always the individual value and interest, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, there's no way that we can take care of anything else in our life. So getting to our own equilibrium is also a very, very important goal.
And when you're participating as a mental health professional in the collaborative process, you're working essentially as a neutral, right? You're not necessarily, as you say, providing therapy for anybody, but are you also helping at times to address conflicts that might arise, whether it's with the lawyers and their clients or between the parties? Are you also serving in that capacity as part of the team?
Yeah, it's the part of the team, and I love that word team because it's what I think is one of the most effective aspects of helping people through this process. But yes, we're taking a look at all of the emotions that are in the room, and we're all people, so those emotions are coming from everywhere. And we want to make sure that the agenda is moving in the right direction. And when we're sidelined by conflicting agendas, that's where we come in and using my understanding of what each of these parents are needing and really being able to listen to that in that neutral way, as you're saying. Whether it's an individual meeting or a couple meeting, it's always a neutral meeting because the goal is always getting to the other side of this and allowing healing to begin as soon as possible.
Thank you. You know, the other piece of this process that I think is so fascinating is that when we add yet another neutral professional, a financial professional, there are benefits that are just unmatched in other processes. And we have Traci here as our financial neutral professional. So I'd like to next turn to you, Traci, talk about your role, but first tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice, and you'll have to unmute yourself in order to do that. So, There
want
we
to
go.
be quiet, very quiet. Thank you, Mark. And it's great to see so many people on this recording being a part of this process that we have spent a week developing and talking about. So my practice, I've been doing financial planning for about 12 years, and I narrowed down into the divorce arena probably about 10 years ago. I have my own financial planning, divorce financial planning practice, as well as a collaborative financial neutral in Westport, Connecticut. I, like Michelle and the rest of the group here, we love what we do, because when people are going through something this difficult, it's good to have an empathetic team to help you and to be a part of it. So that carries through with all of my clients, and it's always nice to see them when they get to the other side.
Let's dig in a little bit more to the role of the financial neutral professional in the collaborative process. As a member of this interdisciplinary team, tell us a little bit about how you approach that role.
Okay. As a financial neutral, my role is to really help the couple to gather, to organize, and to understand their financial picture. And what that means, and I try and make it as simple as possible, because couples are always so overwhelmed with going through this process, and finances are no different. So I try and break it down into kind of 4 quadrants, which is what you owe, what they own, what they spend, and what they earn. And that's the pillars that I use for any of my financial planning clients, to start from those 4 quadrants, because having knowledge and an understanding of those 4 things is really important. You know, even in the best of circumstances, gathering financial information is really painful. It can be a very painful process. And so I think it's really important to bite it off into small pieces, because I think one of the things that holds people back during this process is the fear of not having enough. How am I going to live? What am I going to do? I haven't worked in so many years. What does that look like? So to really help them with tools to manage their fear. And I do that in a couple of different ways. A big part of it is what I'll call cash flow illustrations, to help clients see kind of what they have. And unlike the adversarial process, which doesn't do any of this, they just tell you what the split's going to be, and nobody's doing any kind of further depth financial analysis for the couples, and especially what they're going to look like when they're running 2 households. That's really important. So starting with the clients, after we gather and organize and start to put into a document so they can see on paper what they have. And I'll just say one thing about divorce. So marriage is all about love, right? Well, divorce tends to end up being about money and the kids. And so the component of the finances, which so many people either weren't involved with or don't want to be involved with, they're going to need to take ownership of that as they start to run 2 separate households. So that's a hugely important component for me when working in this collaborative process, is to make sure that when I meet a couple, that I understand where each of them are in the financial education hierarchy, right? Is one of them more educated than the other one? Did one of them never pay a bill and has no idea how much the spouse makes? So that's always a starting point for me, because that's going to help me to then put on my hat as a financial therapist and try and help people get to a somewhat equivalent financial literacy level, where they both understand what the numbers mean as a couple, and then what they're going to mean when they are uncoupled and back on their own. Very important. Some of the things a financial neutral does, I work with the other professionals to help couples figure out their interests. Not their positions, but their interests. What are their goals? What are things that are important to them? And that's always a much better place to start than from winning. And this is what I want, and this is what I deserve, as Jill mentioned before. So it's an exploration of potentially figuring out what their life is going to look like when they are no longer together. And that is done so beautifully with a team approach, because we all come together with a different skill set that complements one another to help our clients in a time that they may not go through anything quite as difficult. I, as a financial neutral, I also create all of the financial data. And again, unlike adversarial processes, I am one person. I gather the data from both parties and I analyze it, I input it, and I process it so that we are able as a team to sit down and look at what this couple has from a financial standpoint, and that gives us a starting point. I will also do what I like to refer to it as breaking the family after they are apart down into little tranches, right? Because maybe we're only going to look at a year after divorce because the house will be sold and the kids will be out of high school. And then we're going to look at maybe 4 years down the road. Litigation doesn't ever go down that road. So it's wonderful to have a partner in the collaborative process that can help our clients kind of see from a financial standpoint how things are going to look. And not only that, but what challenges and what changes do I need to make if I want to meet my interest and goals that were set forth at the very beginning of the practice. And I'll go back and say, in one of the first meetings of collaborative divorce, that is one of the first things we address in a full team meeting, is understanding from both clients what is important to them. Not what do they want, but what is important to them. That's huge for us to understand that. As far as being in the process with professionals, I think that in the litigation process, you have two attorneys collecting the data. You have them coming together with their own financial affidavit. In this particular process, it is all funneled through a person like myself, the financial neutral, and then it is discussed and reviewed with both parties. I will say, if one of the spouses is having trouble feeling up to speed financially, there will always be a one-off meeting or a two-off meeting to work with that spouse one-on-one to try and get them up to a point where their fear is less because they understand more about their financial situation and how that's going to look. Okay, I've probably talked a lot about it, a lot of different things, but I think in the long run, the financial neutral really helps the clients to save money, because it's one person gathering the financial data as opposed to two attorneys and their rates, and that's extremely helpful. And then getting to the other side with the financial knowledge that we've been able to collect in this process will help them to live a more successful financial future.
Thank you, Traci. As we segue into this, the wrap-up phase now, maybe what we could do is ask our attorneys here, Jill and Brendan, tell us a little bit about your perspective as collaborative lawyers working with the neutral financial professional. What are some of the important values to the clients and to the family having someone like Traci as a neutral financial professional on the team?
Brendan, should I go first? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, of course. Go for
Okay. Well, so I cannot emphasize enough how different this process is than the traditional litigation approach. The education that you get from your financial neutral, as well as the support you get from the mental health professional, changes the entire dynamic of what your divorce could be. And for me, what I like to say is that We all, and some of us have alluded to it, people have this fantasy that when they get divorced, they never have to deal with their other spouse again. And that's just not true, because most people are connected either by children, no matter how old they get, or financially, if you're getting support, or if there's coordination between assets that have to get split down the road. In a litigation, so much disruption happens because it's all about me, me, me. When most of the time in this process, what you get when you're doing a financial planning analysis, as well as the mental health perspective on what you want for yourselves and your family, you're realizing that the more you focus on I, the less you have going forward. And so the collaborative process, I like to say, is not an adjective describing a noun. Collaborative. It's nice, we're all nice, we all get along. It's a nice process. No. Collaborative process is a noun, and it's a team approach, so that when you think about divorce, you're thinking about it as a legal process, a financial planning exercise, and learning how to have better communication around things like your children who are going to get married one day, hopefully, or their graduations. Your divorce should not be the central focus of your children's lives forever. So for me, that's why I love the collaborative process. It treats this tragedy for families as a transition to be managed and to be learned from, with the support of professionals who can really help you enter into that new life on a better footing than if you had duked it out in court and have added trauma after trauma after trauma to yourselves and to your children.
Brandon, same question to you. What do you tell us a little bit about your sense of the value of having these, particularly the financial neutral, and then we could talk about the mental health professional as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of like to look at this holistically in the value of both, and I think for the same reason. So this idea of the interdisciplinary team working with the attorneys who are also committed to actively listening and not just holding on to a position, and encouraging that and being guided along by the neutrals, allows for something that I think is an opportunity that's sometimes lost for, sometimes maybe too simplistic a reason, but solid intention is, we're not here to talk about the past, we're going forward. And in and of itself, that is fairly accurate, but I think the team, particularly the neutrals, allows folks to simultaneously get the best of both worlds. You are looking forward while being appropriately informed by the past, because there's lessons and successes and failures in a marriage and co-parenting relationship that, when looked at from a lens of what can we learn from this, is absolutely crucial. So you can move forward without ignoring the lessons and feeling heard in the process as well. So the team and the neutrals really will hold that together, whether it's financially, what didn't work for us, what did work. Let's discuss that. We don't have to discard it. That's kind of looking back a little bit, but for a very specific reason, to move forward. And I think that ability to not lose lessons, whether it was unfortunate results or one that worked at the time, is what allows people to kind of really tailor and make possible option generation so much more fruitful. So that's a nuance that's really hard to achieve in any other way, where you can not get stuck in the past, but pick from it what is going to make going forward better. It's not one or the other. And that, again, is a tricky line that this process holds as a possibility.
So I want to turn to our two neutral professionals, perhaps get you to comment on what it's like working with lawyers. And first, what I'd like to do is just mention that in all the years I've spent practicing as a litigation attorney, and I don't do this anymore, I found that holding on to a position and clinging to a particular result was actually very, very important, because the main focus is I have to persuade a judge. The judge is the one who has the power to decide. So I have to have a clear position and a sense of how to advocate for that position as a lawyer. In fact, I've got to dominate and control what goes on in the courtroom. So for Traci and Michelle, tell us how it's like, what it's like to work with collaborative attorneys who aren't doing any of those things that I just mentioned?
I'll start off and just say that it's been a really interesting learning process over these years doing this, watching and learning as attorneys. I think sometimes struggle to find that place where they have their hat on as a collaborative attorney and are fully invested in that collaborative process, and having the opportunity to be on a team with attorneys and have the legal perspective and the guidance is invaluable. That's my experience. I find it to be very positive. And personally, one of the things that has been something for me to get stronger in is being able to sit at the head of that table and help the process move along, rather than, say, look to the attorneys to be the leaders there. And while we are a team, it's important to have the neutrals be a really strong part of that team. So that's been my learning curve.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. That's so insightful. And Traci, how would you comment on sort of the role of the collaborative lawyers? You've been working with lawyers in all kinds of different contexts. Talk a little bit about your perspectives on working with attorneys who are collaboratively trained.
So I just want to clarify that we are all here. We are all trained collaborative professionals. And there are some attorneys that will put themselves out there as collaborative. And you think, okay, but they're not actually following the kinds of processes that we do as true collaborative professionals. So for me, what comes to mind the most for me is in litigation, unless it's a very complex case, most attorneys can do it by themselves. They don't reach out to somebody like myself for financial help. They're doing the financial affidavit. They're doing all of that. In the collaborative process, we are all on equal footing, and the attorneys rely on the financial neutral as much, if not more, than they rely, because they don't have to do any of that financial piece, right? So they're able to really focus on the client and not so much the numbers. The financial neutral takes care of the numbers. And then there's also the mental health professional, and that is able to what I'll call neutralize, right? In litigation, there is no neutralizing. It is both sides, who's going to win, who's going to lose. And so for me to have attorneys really believe and trust that collaborative process with other professionals is extremely great for couples who decide to use this process. So
I'm seeing that we're getting to the point where we're into this for now close to 45 minutes, and I think we're going to want to wrap up. It may be perhaps worth mentioning some of the structural pieces about the collaborative process. For example, and I know, Jill, you've used this term, and Michelle, I think even today you used the idea of the safe container that we create. And one of the things that we do is create an agenda for each meeting within the team. We talk together before we have meetings so that we can try to really maintain some degree of control, and not in controlling in the sense that I mentioned before, but in the sense of allowing people to express themselves as necessary and being prepared for those things. Just curious, when we deal with cases involving children, maybe we could wrap up with this. What is the importance of this collaborative process for parents and families when they have children? Let's start maybe with Jill.
So what I'll say about this, which is profound, two things. One, all the research is very, very clear that children can handle their parents getting divorced. They really, really can. They can adjust to it. They can adjust to the different schedules going back and forth. What they can't adjust to and what leads to the worst outcomes for them is conflict. So conflict between the parents, but especially conflict that centers around them. Relatedly, for many, many years, I worked in the child protection world, kids in foster care who'd been abused or neglected by their parent. And I was an advocate for those children, and I ran a program of advocates for the children in those proceedings. And almost 100% of the time, a child who'd been abused by a parent, was in foster care, wanted nothing more than to go back to that parent. That bond between a parent and child, even if it's not the best, is lasting. So it's really important for parents to understand that in a divorce, nobody wins custody. It's not the right frame to think about it. And so the collaborative process really honors that, because you don't end up fighting about the children. You end up really working hard to make sure that the transition is smooth for them.
Thank you. And just in terms of closing remarks, going around the room here, does anybody have anything further you'd like to add before we wrap up? Starting with you, Brenda.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I just to piggyback off of that sentiment from Jill, because I think this is a good place to end. Parenting is really, really hard. There is no real playbook for it. It's dynamic, and we're all learning on the job. And what Jill was pointing out is that if you have this collaborative mindset, you can still maintain co-parenting strengths. Your children are better served for it. You're not going in there already doubting the intentions of the other. So when difficult issues come up, you're comfortable talking about it, figuring out what to do. And children grow up in an environment seeing parents work through difficult things, disagreements sometimes, but together for them. And that fundamentally changes their experience of living in two households. It's seeing parents get through tough times and still surround and rally around them. And it's very hard to do that coming out of a contentious litigation environment where you're not seeing what's going on at the other house. You don't really trust the other party as much as maybe you once did. And you never practice communicating about tricky subjects and putting training wheels on that process again for being divorced. So this really serves children in that way that all parents can be benefited from.
And Michelle, I think I might have interrupted you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say a little something about the parenting plan itself.
Yeah.
We've mentioned the parenting plan, and it is a document that is going to be, if you have children under the age of 18, it's going to be something that is a part of your dissolution. But the parenting plan is a piece of paper. It's many pieces of paper, but it's two-dimensional. And families, kids are not two-dimensional. And so the parenting plan document itself takes you only so far. It can be very, very detailed. And when I'm helping families to develop their parenting plan through this process, and then helping them to implement it after this process has come and gone, it's much more than just what's written in black and white on a piece of paper. It has got to be a fluid document, because families are going to continue to grow. Your kids are going to continue to evolve. And first of all, we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know who our kids are going to become. And we don't know what elements maybe we didn't discuss. And even if they were discussed, and even if they were agreed upon, things do change. And having the ability, whether it's the two of you together without any assistance because you're cooperative and engaged, or it's with the help of a mental health neutral to assist you in co-parenting sessions, having the ability to move forward so that your children's lives can be full and continue to grow along with what they want and need, that is a really essential part of this. The idea that this is fluid and that you're able to discuss it, and also that your kids are able to put this part of their lives into context, and that they have many, many more years that are not filled with conflict that they can actually experience. That's really the beauty of this collaborative process as well.
Thank you. And I neglected to mention that anyone who's listening could certainly join by using the chat function at the bottom of the screen. We're happy to answer any questions as we're coming to a conclusion. Traci, any final remarks as we wrap up?
Just one. My one wish is that more families in the state of Connecticut will explore this collaborative process, because in my opinion, in the years I've been doing this, it is the best way for a family to get through one of the worst experiences.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. This was really, I think, what we were hoping to accomplish was to give each of our professions an opportunity to describe the interdisciplinary collaborative process. And as I mentioned earlier, this is part of the week-long series sponsored by the Connecticut Council for Non-Adversarial Divorce. You can check that website. If you have anything further, you can contact any of us at the emails that are shown below. I want to thank our presenters, Jill, Brendan, Michelle, Traci. Really wonderful discussion today. And I think at this point we can call it a wrap.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.